Science meets spirituality in the quest for truth and knowledge to free humanity and transform this planet into a paradise.
Hello, everyone. Hi, this is Crystal. Welcome to Physics 125th meeting. Today is the 5th of June, and we've got very illustrious speakers here today. And before I continue, I want to share screen again so we can see the agenda for today's meeting. All right. So give me a moment. Let's Okay, I'll share screen now again. Once again, share screen. Right, so this is our agenda for the day. I need to look at the base here. Yeah, it's here. Okay, so I want to maximize the screen so you can see it properly. Right, so we have our meeting where I'm the chair, Crystal Gore. I'm the founder of FESIG, and I have my co-chair with me, Dr. Fres Fresel, who's with me from day one. And he is the principal of our FESIG Academy, and he's been teaching classes in our R&D teams. So today is the 5th of June. We are starting our meeting at 6:30 p.m. British Standard Time promptly. Not quite promptly today, sorry, because of technical issues. So FESIG is the platform where science meets spirituality. I'll go through it very quickly because most of you are regulars anyway. The agenda for the day is we have the first session speaker. We have our meetings on the first Wednesday of the month. Okay, it's just mark that down in your calendar, in your diary, so you wouldn't want to miss it because having live interaction with speakers is very important. We have some of the most brilliant speakers speaking at our platform. Together, we are learning together from them, all right? And this is all done for free for 8-9 years. We had been out of pocket doing all this for free for you because we love you and we want you to progress along with us in doing what we need to do to free humanity. So the first session speaker is Dan Winter, returning to talk about the ultimate physics of soul, from soulless AI to real electrical immortality. Here, an electrical engineer explaining the difference between what happens in a program, in a machine, and a soul, gaining energy during fractal charge collapse. Planckfire.com is one of his many websites, is the prime motto for the existence of life force, conscious awareness, and gravity. And so, until we learn the principle, our kids will become trapped in increasingly soulless civilization. Well, that's really superb. And we're all ears then. So the second session, we have two speakers each month. So the second speaker is a new speaker, Robert Maxim, the award-winning author of his books. And so he speaks of the dimensional energy transfer generation and about his new free energy invention and the energy sources, energy generation system from Gamma Scuti 5. Apparently, his Piers the Veil, he could remember who he was in the past lives, and he didn't have the veil of forgetfulness. He remembers the interactions with his ET families from the other planets and civilizations. He talks about Atlantean energy generation tower system, energy transference through dimensions into our plane is A432 Hertz, the God tone. He will be discussing that fun with numbers, vortex mets, and the sacred number 9. Solar and energy with scientific evidence. He will explain physicality, the reality of creation from the atomic level. He warned that those who are not using their intelligence and wisdom will lose it and their soul will be absorbed. So once we finish all the Q&A sessions, then I will adjourn to the next meeting that will be on the 126th FESIG meeting will be on the 3rd of July. Please pen that down in your diary because I do have people complaining why I didn't tell them earlier, but it's understood. All of FESIG meetings are held on the first Wednesdays of the month. We have served you without fail for 8-9 years now. We had never gone missing, and exactly that time frame we will be there for you. So if you want to write to me, Crystal at truevisionpeace.com, our website truevisionpeace.com/FESIG.html. Please subscribe to our channels, YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, Facebook. And if you want live interaction with everybody, so you can form study groups and discuss the teachings from our illumined speakers, you can go to our Telegram channel, FESIG_group, and have a good discussion. Thank you, folks. Now, without much ado, I'm going to introduce Dan Winter once again. He had been speaking at our platform. Thank you, Dan, for being so supportive of our mission, our platform here. Dan Winter is an electrical engineer, plasma tech implosion, biofeedback inventor, and fractality physics researcher. He also invented the Theraphi, which is proven so effective and useful. Dan Winter has a multifaceted background that spans a broad spectrum of disciplines. He graduated with honors at the Jesuit University of Detroit. He pursued graduate studies in psychophysiology and the origins of languages. He has worked as a systems analyst with IBM, an industrial metallurgist, and metallurgist and a crystallographer. He has undertaken many diverse studies from quantum physics to modeling and early biofeedback prototype equipment, at the MIT Space Lab to developing the early biofeedback prototype equipment as Dr. Albert X's protege. Widely traveled, Dan has sojourned to study at the Gurdjieff School of Sacred Gymnastics in Florence with Buckminster Fuller, the Giza Pyramids, Israel, the Andes, and at Findon. Dan lectures extensively around the world, especially known for his applications of mathematical modeling to optimize spiritual developments as a spin-off of his research to the relationship with emotion, to wavelength structure. Right, so there you go. Dan, being a prolific writer as well, is a very enthusiastic speaker and teacher of his knowledge and technology, and he's very renowned on his brilliance about the Kozyrev's mirror and time reversal. And he talks about physics of the universe, fractal physics of charge distribution. And today he's talking about a very important subject, the physics of the soul. And if it's not taught in schools, the children will be soulless. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you. That was a little bit too much background about me, but thank you, Crystal. You are dedicated. It's wonderful. Yeah, most people know that I've been teaching physics of consciousness for over 30 years in most every Western country and city. And many of my inventions, Theraphi.net, piezofire.com, flameinmind.com are brainwave tech. But today we're here to talk about what I've become quite passionate about, is that I think actually electrical engineers can now talk about the physics of soul with measurement technology. And I think that's important because as governments become more and more aware of how a soul is formed electrically, we can avoid creating soulless conditions for our kids. That's like, for example, I strongly believe that kids with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in their ears all day literally lose soul, actually. And let me explain why I'm so convinced of that as an electrical engineer. So we started when Professor Korotkov famously documented that golden ratio in brain waves correlated to when kids could see without their eyes, World Without Blindness project. And that became flameinmind.com/outer vision. And we help teach kids to see without their eyes. And the key is that they get this cascade based on golden ratio from alpha to gamma in their brainwave. It's literally a vortex. So consciousness is quite clearly, very simply, a charge vortex. And charge behaves like a superfluid inside the synaptic array of your head. And you're inhabiting a smaller array and which is the synapses in your head, the net of fireflies, the Indra's net. But when you lucid dream and when you die successfully, or when you remote view, it's required that you inhabit a larger array. And we now believe we know exactly what that is. It is the nodes of a coherent longitudinal interferometry. Could you grab the blue star, Mother? Thank you. So what we believe is happening is that when you make this golden ratio cascade in your brain waves, and obviously it's a bliss moment. That's what flameinmind.com is about, is that this correlates to literally bliss, that there's implosion preceding the radiance of bliss. And that implosion is the golden ratio cascade, golden ratio being fractality perfected. And that cascade then squeezes that vortex inside your head to a point. And that point is actually very specific. It's named Planck, as in planckfire.com, Planck length and time. So yeah, thank you, Valerie. So the nodes of the array outside your body are coherent longitudinal nodes, sometimes called sacred sites, but actually they're compression nodes of what's called longitudinal interferometry. Sometimes it's called scalar, but the more accurate term is longitudinal. And longitudinal wave, remember, is the compressional part of the electromagnetics, as opposed to, and the opposite of, the transverse up and down magnetic. And I have graphics on this in a minute. But I want to just do a little intro. So when children start to see without their eyes, having been trained to make this bliss state in their brain, frequently they become clairvoyant. They start seeing their ancestors. And the grandmothers, I mean, the parents often freak out, like, dead grandma's over there? What? So the physics of clairvoyance is now clear to me. It's the result of the same implosive compression that produces bliss. And during that implosive compression of charge in that perfected vortex, fractality and brainwaves, as it were, what squeezed out the tip of that pine cone of vortex compression is the transverse wave goes down a vortex and emerges as coherent longitudinal interferometry. The same longitudinal electromagnetic, which Bearden proved is the stuff gravity waves are made of, and the same coherent longitudinal that the Aboriginals called dreaming track song lines. And that's going to be our first slide. Let me see if I can do the slide. So what I want to show you, can you enable screen sharing so I can show the slides here? Let's see. Host disabled screen share. I really would like.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to do that.
So I want to show the university literature of the frequencies that trigger lucid dreaming. And lucid dreaming is parallel to being able to take memory through death. It's very critical. Oh, good. That is working now. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So now I'm going to share this screen. Let's see if this works. There we go. Okay. So on the bottom right, you're seeing the 2540 hertz. These are the frequencies that university studies showed triggered lucid dreaming. Remember, if you can lucid dream, it's probable that you will take memory through death. And the physics of that is clear, like when Jodie Foster got in the dodecahedron called Contact. And did she go through a Stargate or did she lucid dream? It was both. So that coherence is parallel to here. Our Theraphi.net plasma technology is well known to trigger lucid dreaming. And the frequency signature we use for that is a cascade. Here's the frequency signature we use for Theraphi.net. It originally came from Priori, Lukowski, and Reif, but I perfected it by equation called planckfire.com. So the harmonic cascade that we feed all of my technologies, Flame in Mind, Theraphi, Plasma Fire, Piezo Fire, is this one right here called planckfire.com, the fire phi of Planck. I take Planck length and time, the musical key signature of every wave physics has ever measured, and multiply by exponent powers of golden mean ratio, which is fractality perfected. And that implosion looks like this, a caduceus, and down that cone of that caduceus, you get this implosive compression. So this is what the Theraphi.net looks like. Oh, that's the French one. There we go. So I have a phase conjugate noble gas at 500,000 volts with a complex wave from this bifiller Tesla coil. And I feed them these complex wave low frequency harmonics, which are phase conjugate, to an RF frequency, which is phase conjugate, to the noble gas output optics, which is phase conjugate. By phase conjugate, you can think implosive. And so that replicably helps trigger lucid dreaming, as in the many reports. So now I wish to come up with a hypothesis. As an electrical engineer, what does this have to do with soul? So remember, when Gurdjieff taught us at claymont.org, where I did the Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic, he said, if you weren't about making this spiritual stuff around your body called Kesjan body, you weren't going to get immortal. He called it Kesjan body. Now, the Tibetans, they call it rainbow light body. The Egyptians, they call it the Ba from the Ka. My question is, what do electrical engineers call it? The stuff that enables you to take memory through death. And I believe we know exactly what that is. And I call that the physicsofsoul.com, which is my current project. Now, there's a slide I want to show you here where when you go down that vortex about what's created. So here's the vortex. It's the turning inside out point in the vortex. It's a fusion point between light cones. They call them Bucky bow ties. And at that fusion point, you get the scintillation that John Dee actually used for calling ancestors. So the fusion point is going to look like this. There's the vortex point there. And you have a caduceus cascade down that vortex point. And so out the tip of that vortex point, on the left, the transverse wave is going in up and down. On the right, the longitudinal wave emerges out the squirt gun, coherent compressional wave. Coherent compressional wave looks like this. This is the longitudinal. There it is compression. So the axis of compression oscillation in the longitudinal EMF is parallel to the direction of propagation. So it goes further, and it happens to go through about anything, as opposed to the transverse electromagnetic, which is here, where the oscillation is perpendicular to the direction of propagation. The transverse EMF is all of our radio, but unfortunately, it doesn't go so far. So we know, for example, when Ingo Swann famously lit that thermistor, literally a flameinmind.com, that's the website, he lit a flame with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage repeatedly in a laboratory. And now we know how he lit that flame with his mind. Actually, the longitudinal waves, when they cross at a distance, they produce a synergetic compressional point at the middle where you can contain heat at a distance. In fact, coherent longitudinal interferometry, sometimes called scalar, incorrectly called scalar, is the only physics of all action at a distance. And Einstein called that spooky because he didn't know why objects fall to the ground. He didn't know that coherent longitudinal EMF is the stuff all gravity waves are made of. So the point I'm making is that when you get this implosive compression going in your brain waves, and then there's recursive braiding in your DNA, the squeezing is successful. And what emerges on the right there is the soul, which is a coherent longitudinal field, which you can inhabit. You can embed in that array and propagate in that array. You know, there's dozens of medical surgeons who have gone out of their body and talked about where they were looking at their body from outside their body. Sorry, this lecture was also prepared in French. But here's the book from Tom Bearden showing that all gravity waves are made of this stuff, coherent longitudinal EMF, versus the Aboriginals calling these dreaming track song lines, which was their only name for God, incidentally. And now we know what the song line dreaming track was. It's this coherent longitudinal field that looks like a Dodecki cosa. So the squeezing process, golden mean ratio sine. You see how it kind of creates that implosive squeezing, looks like a pine cone. And the confusion of our generation is that we don't know where soul comes from. So these kids are looking for soul in a computer, and they're going to be sadly disappointed because soul don't exist in any computer. Nope. Because you can't have biologic implosive plasma compression emitting coherent longitudinal field, the stuff of lucid dreaming and successful death. So I often use the metaphor from The Wizard of Oz. You wake up inside the dream, in this case in the poppy field, in what's called the Emerald City, which is a coherent crystal of lucid dreaming. Oh, that's named after you, Crystal. So staying awake in that inner lucid dream, that ability to be wakeful there, is actually the physics of developing a soul. Now, in here, we're talking about Jean-Charles Moyen developing that into teleportation, but we'll go to that in a minute. So this is the book I wrote about the detailed physics, plankfire.com. And basically, if you take that Planck length and time, the musical key signature of every wave in physics, and multiply by powers of golden ratio, you get amazing, you get all the radii of hydrogen, you get Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, Schumann harmonics, brainwave harmonics. You get every biologic frequency that is emerging from chaos. You get the origin of life, you get the origin of negentropy. That's called PlanckFire.com. And again, it looks like this, just to animate what Planck fire looks like. This is what it looks like. And I later wrote the equation to prove this is literally the structure of hydrogen. So that implosion. So here is some examples of Planck fire. So the equation predicts these frequencies in blue, 2.78, 7.29. In blue, see that caduceus. But in green here now, you have the known Schumann harmonics, which also are a phase conjugate pump wave. And so these are some of the variables in physics predicted by my new equation called origin of negentropy, PlanckFire.com, an ATP, the ratio of the height and diameter of DNA, the origin of all sacred dimension. Sacred dimension is simply a name for charge collapse. Planck fire is the solution to charge collapse because it's the solution to compression. You get exactly the two frequencies that make photosynthesis happen. Most physicists agree that charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. I have newly answered the question, what causes charge collapse? And here's a new website about 150 other new variables predicted by PlanckFire.com. So this is what the radii of hydrogen looks like. Notice that pine cone shape, that implosion. So that applies to DNA, and we're not going to do all these slides. Here's our publication on the structure of hydrogen. Note that the Mandelbrot fractal is a golden ratio fractal. Golden ratio is by inspection the solution to fractality, therefore the solution to compression. Note that that same cascade of brainwave harmonics, in green here, is literally the same cascade of Schumann harmonics, bottom right, is literally the brainwave harmonics on the left, which create bliss, called flameinmind.com. So this is when we're teaching kids to see without their eyes. This is Vindor. And later we learned that this same process of teaching this golden ratio and octave cascade in the brainwaves actually triggers clairvoyance. And the physics of clairvoyance, hint, soul, is the same coherent longitudinal field that's produced by this golden ratio implosive cascade. It's a Valentine, it's love. This applies to the physics of death, where the lattice cobweb tunnel spiral you see at the time of death prove that successful death is literally a black hole of successful compression, which is why you got to see your whole life pass through your eyes in the second before you die, because you got to do compression good or you don't make it into that array, collective unconscious, communion of saints, heaven, which is actually a compression event. So getting ghosts in and out of that array of the collective unconscious is a compression process. That's why successful death has a very specific physics, which is teachable. There's a hygiene to it, the physics of soul. And so this is how DNA is recursively braided by those same phonon harmonics. And we looked at this, and this is the live blood cell results from Theraphi. But what did I want to show you here? So, I don't know if I have the slide here, but the same frequencies that the kids make to see without their eyes are the frequencies that Jean-Charles Moyen produced in his brainwaves when he replicably teleported with witnesses. Let me see if I can find that slide. So famously, Jean-Charles Moyen, friend of Elena Nadan, and we do a lot of lectures at those groups, he produced a golden ratio and octave cascade at very high amplitude in his brainwaves. And he teleported with witnesses and came back with sand between his feet. The physics of stargates is this implosion into this coherent longitudinal array, actually. So this sort of brings up the question of the physics of propulsion here. And let me just explain this as briefly as I can. Supposing you wanted to know the principle behind electrogravitics. So here's the, now that we know that coherent longitudinal field directionally projected is the physics of how gravity is produced. That vortex producing directional longitudinal is the physics of electrogravitics. So for example, in the famous EM drive microwave propulsion device, the microwave bouncing inside the trapezoid could be optimized by my equation and produce more gravity, because now we know what causes gravity electrically. It's a golden ratio cascade spitting out coherent longitudinal EMF directionally. So for example, in Schauberger's device, a piezo vortex producing voltage from gravity, if the angle of that vortex is correct, and we have lots of slides about that, but then out that piezo vortex comes a longitudinal field which is directional. And actually, that was called the repulsine, and it was an excellent gravity-making device. The reason it's gravity-making is it spits out coherent longitudinal directionally because the vortex aligns the transverse wave and implodes them out the center of the pine cone as a longitudinal field, which is what gravity waves are made of. This was the Schauberger's propulsion device. And here's our experiments, fractalfield.com/propulsion. We have made gravity with vortex. We understand the physics. And then in the more advanced sense, this is what's called the Atlantean fire crystal or the Koski frost crystal, made 800 times its own weight in gravity. This is all at fractalfield.com/propulsion. So the famous crystals in a warp core use a phase conjugate pump wave to implode that crystal, exactly like the phase conjugate pump wave implodes your aura when you have bliss. If you're not exposed to the Schumann cascade, you don't get the phase conjugate pump wave. And so that's the aspect of bliss. And this is about fire crystals and about floating, using cavity structure effect, which is implosive capacitance to produce gravity, as in Grebennikov. So now I'm going to turn off the screen share here. I shared enough slides, I suppose. So have I made a case here that we could teach scientists and government what a soul is? That if you have access to the coherent compression, for example, magnetic line crosses, sometimes called sacred space, where Korotkov proved telepathy is enabled, and where Bruce Cathy proved radioactive critical mass is reduced. So at the sacred sites, Dodeca-Icosa Earth grid of planet Earth, telepathy is measurably enabled because those are the coherent longitudinal nodes. So you get access to that compression, and bliss is closer to hand. Now, this means that those longitudinal nodes enable a kind of DNA radio. Another example is the reason that Agnihotra works at sunrise and sunset, and remote viewing, remote healing also work better at sunrise and sunset, also equinox and solstice, because those right angles, which are in physics called four-wave mixing, is how you make phase conjugation and how you interface, embed incoherent longitudinal. What that means is we need to be teaching our kids how to do what Castaneda said, find your place of power before you sit down in the room. I mean, find the place of compression. So essentially, just as the Aboriginals said, they said, if you don't have the skill to teach your young people how to have a bliss experience, you do not have culture, which means quite clearly that in the West, we do not have culture by that definition. Remember, access to a bliss experience means you will get an immune system, you will have access to lucid dreaming, and you will take memory through death, called getting a soul. Hello. So yes, we need to invent culture by inventing the electrical skill to teach our young people how to have a bliss experience electrically so their DNA can implode. Remember, we have measured that when the EKG phonon coherence, I invented the word heart coherence, realheartcoherence.com. So when the heart coherence, phonon coherence embeds, triggers the DNA measurably recursively braid implodes. That's what those slides were about. And so the implosion, recursive thickening, braiding of DNA, measurably resulting from access to bliss, means the DNA is doing that same squeezing operation to enable the emitting, again, of that coherent longitudinal field. Ba from the Ka, Kesjan body, rainbow light body. You know why there's rainbows when Tibetan saints die? Because their aura contributed implosive compression to the environment, which is the physics of the reason rainbows exist. They call it a rainbow light body. Well, the coherent longitudinal field, remember, the frequencies that make photosynthesis happen are very narrow, purple and orange, and they're exactly golden ratio times Planck, which means phase conjugation to longitudinal interferometry is the reason photosynthesis exists. It's the reason color exists. distorting at the center of the pine cone of the vortex called the origin of the rainbow. So all of that points to something very simple, that bodies need access to the form of electrical coherence that enables them to radiate that. So let's take that in practical terms. It means that the kids need to be taught to escape from metal buildings full of electrosmog and dead air to where there's some access to the Schumann cascade, ancient trees, ancient stone circles, and there they can get that recursive implosive compression going in their aura, access to bliss. So unfortunately, it is my conviction that almost every major action governments take today, like, oh, let's put more Wi-Fi and electrosmog in the kids' classroom. Let's take out the sunlight and install fluorescent crap, which destroys attention span, because they don't know what attention is. It's implosive compression. So, and what I would call the medical stabbing process, where the pets didn't even recognize their owners because the aura had disappeared. Hello, this is called soullessness in government. And the only solution to soullessness in government is to teach the government and the universities what a soul is. I feel very strongly about this because I feel that our children will lose the ability to take memory through death, literally physics of soul, if they're continuously exposed to this soulless electrosmog poison called Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 5G, Linky. It's the amount of electrosmog in today's modern building. Let me give you an example. I'm working currently with Tony Rodriguez, who is a hero. He's one of the secret space program survivors. And Tony runs and teaches a school for remote viewing. This guy is very advanced. Wonderful. I love Tony. Anywho, he told me about experience he had recently. He teaches remote viewing. We know the physics of remote viewing. You need to inhabit the longitudinal node. That means there can be alarms that detect remote viewers. That means that remote viewing is more possible if you're at a magnetic line crosspoint. Anywho, so this big corporation takes them into their ugly metal building full of 1,000 Wi-Fi channels and Bluetooth channels. And he goes in there and they ask him to remote view. And he goes, oh shit, it don't work. and then he goes out in the parking lot where there's fresh air and sunshine and still some residual coherent magnetic lines and does the remote viewing perfectly. What does this tell you? Remember, when Korotkov and Kozyrev proved that you must have a magnetic line crosspoint, literally a longitudinal node, if you want commercial military quality telepathy. These are measurements. This is serious science that proved you need a magnetic line crosspoint, literally access to soul embedding, if you would like military quality telepathy. This has been proven and studied, is well known. So if we begin to learn what it is that takes our children's memory through death into that array called the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, then we're going to have to teach the hygiene for our kids how to get there. And that's going to start with getting rid of all of that electrosmog merd that's destroying the souls of our kids. I mean, if you sit there for hours every day with Bluetooth in your ear, you absolutely will not have access to bliss. You absolutely will lose attention span, aside from it being cancerous. I mean, that square wave of Bluetooth is absolutely disastrous to biology. Sorry, guys. So you have a government here that is soulless because they don't know what a soul is. And so I started this project called physicsofsoul.com, and I have assembled all the data, all the slides, all the science, and about 30 different detailed documentary lectures on the physics of soul, all at physicsofsoul.com. And I'm suggesting that we need to get a show together and teach that to universities and governments before we have billions of children without a soul. So this is my humble opinion. I've come to the conclusion that we need to use much more accurate electrical language to talk about spirituality. Crystal says that we're talking about science and spiritual. Well, that's good. But I think we need a very specific, measurable, documented, proven language to talk about what it is that can make the human immortal. Otherwise, Our teenagers are going to still be looking for a bigger computer and better AI and thinking, oh, that's going to be the soul. No, that's going to be the end of soul. Look, AI is not evil, but what is evil is thinking that that is a path to anything immortal. It is not, because the kind of plasma implosion that makes biology immortal is never, ever, ever going to happen inside a metal computer. It ain't. So we need to tell the kids to stop looking for their soul in them goddamn metal computers. It's okay to use the tool. I'm not saying that's evil. What I'm saying is evil is not teaching the kids what is going to immortalize, literally. Let me give you one more example, and I may stop carrying on here. One more example. So when I invented the measurement of heart coherence, realheartcoherence.com, but doing a second order power spectra of the EKG, internal phase coherence, which is, by the way, a beautiful functional lie detector. It's very cool, because when your heart speaks its truth, your heart measurably becomes phase coherent, literally a laser. So when you speak your truth, your heart becomes a laser, and that's very measurable, realheartcoherence.com. So the thing that emerges from heart coherence, which is a concept I invented and taught and developed the mathematics for, is what Irving Dardick called fractal heart rate variability in his book, Making Waves. Essentially, if you measure someone's heart harmonics and you get basically just one or two frequencies, in other words, no variability, you just get one frequency in their heart rate, that person is going to die very soon. It's very simple. If the heart rate doesn't change, that person is on their deathbed, quite literally. On the other hand, if you measure the heart harmonics and you get maximum inclusiveness, called fractality in heart rate variability, HRV, that is the fastest medical technique for measuring immune health. I repeat, fractal or harmonic inclusive heart rate variability is the fastest way to measure immune health. That's strictly medical literature. There are more papers on HRV in the medical literature than any other subject. So, fractal heart is a healthy heart. We know that. So what does that mean? That means when the harmonics in your heart are inclusive. Now, inclusive harmonics that don't interfere with each other is optimized by something called plankfire.com. Because the golden ratio in harmonics is what reduces destructive interference. So golden ratio, we proved by equation and published, is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference. Golden ratio, I'm talking about the physics of golden mean ratio, the wave mechanics of golden mean ratio, which is obviously fractality perfected. You take golden mean ratio, we proved by equation and published that that is the generalized solution to constructive interference. And therefore, listen closely, Einstein, the generalized solution to constructive compression. I repeat, the generalized solution to constructive compression. Remember, the solution to constructive compression is the solution to the cause of gravity, the solution to the cause of alchemy, the solution to the history of computers, the solution of how you get through death. Okay, the solution to almost every problem science has ever studied, including urban design and architecture, the answer to those questions is the solution to compression. The history of computers is the solution to compression. So once you understand that implosive compression answers all the questions that Einstein died struggling with, like why do objects fall to the ground, and why is there access to it? Why is there action at a distance? The solution to all those problems is over once you understand plankfire.com, which is golden ratio implosive fractal compression, spitting out the coherent longitudinal interferometry, which is the only physics of gravity waves and all action at a distance, including ancestor memories. So we need to begin studying coherent longitudinal interferometry if we would like to understand clairvoyance, ancestor memory, gravity waves, action at a distance, how to contain heat at a distance, fusion reactions, how you get memory through death, how you lucid dream, what clairvoyance is made of. It's all about coherent longitudinal interferometry. So I'm suggesting that as a civilization, we get our soul together, get our show together. Actually, from studying interstellar intergalactic cultures, as I have been doing for over 20 years, we know that artificial intelligence is not just a scourge on this planet. Even the Andromedans in their big Viagra craft triangular outside the other side of the moon, they had a big infestation of AI also. And you know, that black goo stuff that infected the whole Draco Empire before they kicked them out of it, that was AI. So the only way we're going to learn how to get past AI is to study the physics of soul. We are going to need to know the physics of soul if ever we want to make intelligent decisions about how to use AI without getting wiped. We have to know what is the climax form of spiritual and biologic intelligence, and it is coherence in the longitudinal array, namely the ability to be able to navigate in a lucid dream. Think of it, whether you're going into a lucid dream or going into death, it's the same physics. You have to implode well, and you have to get coherent into that array. And you know how you steer in that array? Well, practice steering tornadoes. That's helpful. Jodie Foster did a pretty good job. And she got in a dodecagon contact. She navigated in the lucid dream. Jean-Charles Moyen, who was teleporting regularly with witnesses and coming back the sand between his toes, produced that golden ratio implosion in his brain waves. And you see then, but it was massive, massive coherence in the EEG. So there was this big, powerful vortex imploding down the wormhole, compressing into an inhabitable longitudinal array. And by the way, every time he did it, pretty much he went to the beach. You know why? Longitudinal coherence. And now when we teach people to do healing at a distance with our plasma tech, Theraphi.net, Quantify, piezofire.com, and that a lot of those people do healing at a distance with those technology, and that works pretty well, actually. We teach the physics, and I do mean the physics, of how healing at a distance works. For example, you must have access to the longitudinal array. That means that if the sender and receiver are both at a magnetic line cross point, it's going to work a whole lot better. That means if you did it at sunrise or sunset, like Agnihotra, it's going to work a whole lot better because you have the longitudinal embedding possibility. So that longitudinal array is the physics of dowsing, clairvoyance, lucid dreaming, soul, taking memory through death. So I'm urging people to begin to understand what longitudinal coherence is. It's actually true that most electrical engineers do not, for example, know how to build a longitudinal antenna. And Kansius did when he was burning that cold water with phase conjugate RF, you know. But most electrical engineers do not know how to build a longitudinal antenna, unfortunately. And they don't know how to produce longitudinal coherence, although advanced microwave engineers do. And that's what the scientists that the Russians got out of Germany, they were phase conjugate, and they knew how to make the Russian woodpecker, the scalar, et cetera. Where the Americans got the rocket scientists, they got the bad side of the deal, actually. So study the longitudinal coherence and you get somewhere. Otherwise, So this is the climax of my talk. I'm just saying, I know I talk fast. I had 30 years of Kundalini. So, you know, you inhabit a lightning bolt and your mentation speeds up. And you also learn when you're inhabiting lightning bolts, like Daniel Brinkley, having survived lightning 3 times in his famous near death, that in the center of that lightning bolt is a perfectly shareable wave. That means, you know, that Sufi doing the dervish turn proves to his master that he has pure intention because he did not get dizzy when he did the dervish turn. Well, how do you not get dizzy when you do the dervish turn? You have to focus on the center wherein pure principle embeds and the shareable wave survives. So when you inhabit Kundalini, and I may be the most advanced electrical engineer on the planet, teaching the biophysics of Kundalini, goldenmean.info/Kundalini, our documentaries professionally produced, and the biophysics and the cascade of sacrocranial harmonics and brainwave harmonics and breath harmonics and Schumann harmonics that produce Kundalini are all the same phase conjugate, plankfire.com. So anyway, you know, I had access to intense bliss. I did. I still do. And it drives metabolism very rapidly. It drives speech very rapidly. It drives mentation very rapidly. And as the spin increases, it gets more critical that when you find the center of each experience, you distill it to pure principle. What does that mean? That means subjectively and psychologically, physics of soul boils down in part to this. When you die, you have to do compression well, or you don't get into that array. And by the way, Theraphi does help release ghosts. We know why. But so the exercise, the suggested exercise in one of the Gurdjieff technologies was, well, before you go to bed, you play your day like it was a movie in front of your eyes, and you see if you can watch the movie without getting distracted. And if you can, and you don't get all emotional about something that happened during the day, it means you distilled the events of the day in your memory into pure, shareable principle, essence. That means that those events of that day are now digested and able to go through the compression necessary to inhabit the array of ancestor memory, collective unconscious, communion of saints. So if you did that exercise every day, then you're ready to lucid dream or to die anytime, because everything about you is compressible. Everything about you is shareable. Isn't that interesting that in our civilization today, it's a disease where every government and company and individual is maximizing the number of secrets they can have. Oh, this is a secret, that's security, secret, security. And guess what makes you immortal and able to have a soul is the opposite. Hello. How about doing an experiment of a life that requires no secrets? I can tell you that that would survive death very nicely. In other words, becoming a shareable wave means entering into charge distribution perfection, sometimes called Hey Ave, heaven, or plains of Sharon, or the communion of saints, or Champs-Élysées, the illusion fields. That is a name for a fractal field of distributable coherent longitudinal EMF. I see there's a question at the bottom here. Let me turn on the chat window. How nice.
I'll need to press. We have to start our Q&A session. If you're done now.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
You can be interrupted. You finish, right? Then. Okay, so now I think you can unmute yourself if you have a question, because there's not too many people today. I think speakers forgot to share with their members that they are speaking today, so there's not many. So we can entertain people having a live Q&A session instead of us reading your questions from chat. Okay, so you're welcome.
Yeah, if you would please put, there's a indicator in your chat that says hands up. If you would do that, we will call on you and you can ask your question. Thank you.
Meanwhile, can we have Co-Chair ask the question, because on behalf of our R&D teams, you being the principal of FESIG Academy Press as Co-Chair, I'm sure you have a lot of questions to our electrical engineer.
Yeah, we're going to have questions like crazy because Dan has sparked it, and I would like to say, yes, I'm working on my models. So we get into these vortices as compression, and there was a question also in chat that goes along the same line. And on your opening statement, you have a horizontal compression to the eye, and then it expands. And so you have that point, which and many times we call the 0 point or the transition point. Lenz called it the place where things reverse and continue on. Is the compression point, the optimal compression point, a specific point, or do we run into duality at that point of any kind? Yeah.
Well, it's quite clear that in order to understand that, you'd need to know how a phase conjugate mirror works. So the opposing lasers 180 degrees out of phase meet in what's called a superdielectric barium-strontium titanate, which charge distribution permissivity, called superdielectric, enables the pine cones to kiss noses implosively, efficiently there. And that's the point of phase conjugation, where you measure time reversal and negentropy. So that's the actual physics now. And that is also how John Dee used scintillating light to make ancestor phone calls, or the obsidian mirrors of the Olmec for ancestor phone calls, or the coating on Nostradamus's scrying cup. These are phase conjugate mirrors that enable ancestor communication because they enable communication embedding into the coherent longitudinal array. So the discretion, the resolution of the point of that array is specifically measured as Planck. And then from there, you do multiples of golden ratio, and you get all of the negentropic variables in the universe. So we've answered that question quite specifically at planckfire.com. And also there, then if the radiating longitudinal from that point is then directional, you do have propulsion.
The difference between the two waves, longitudinal and the other, you're basically have a sine wave, and then the other is this compression wave that slaps up against it. It's the difference between being on the surface of a dock in the water and rocking up and down, or being hit by the wave on the side and it's going slap, slap, slap.
Well, a more efficient metaphor there would be how a tsunami works. So it's going as fast as a jet engine, 600 miles an hour, but the boat on the surface doesn't know the tsunami just went under it. That is longitudinal. When it arrives at the shore and it meets the shoreline, the side of the vortex, and it's pushed upward, and then the inertia of that wave goes from longitudinal to up and down perpendicular direction of the direction of propagation, then that's the part of the tsunami wave that will kill you. And that is absolutely the heat-containing transverse component, actually.
Oh, okay.
Longitudinal waves, sound waves are largely longitudinal. Most of the electromagnetics that we use, that we know how to use as electrical engineer, is transverse. Using the component of the electromagnetic field, which is longitudinal, is something very few electrical engineers understand. Although the radar engineers from Germany who learned how to bounce radar off their periscope, they understood very well phase conjugate coatings, and Russia got those scientists.
All right. Clan Mother, you have a question? Please unmute yourself and ask Dan your question, please.
Thank you. Really nice to meet you, Dan. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I've been in the quantum biofeedback industry and in medicine for about 40 years. So I work with some devices Ryan Williams made called a Genius. I'm not sure if you've heard of those. Okay. One of the things I've been interested in, because I used to run health centers and clinics with this kind of technology. Can you talk a little bit more about the quanta, the phi generator and the principles to it? And what you've seen for clients, because I've seen a lot of your testimonials, but I wanted to just get it directly from you myself. So thank you.
Yeah, I see that you're mentioning the triploter and the quantify, and by implication, the Theraphi. All those devices use only and exclusively that specific cascade, planckfire.com. So we take those harmonics in a cascade, which is, for example, how the Schumann harmonics are built, how pyramids make global wireless power, and how human bliss is resultant from the Schumann cascade. And the Schumann cascade as a phase conjugate pump wave is how Gaia became negentropic. So we take that frequency cascade, I showed you the slide, and we drive a complex harmonic series out of the Flame and Sound software as part of flameandmind.com, the world's most powerful bliss-inducing binaural audio, Flame and Sound app at flameandmind.com. And that is the harmonic series, which drives directly Theraphi, Quantify, Piezofire, and indirectly the other products. And even the design of the vortex in the imploder, the imploder.com, is all driven by that perfected implosive cascade. Essentially, what that means is that charge collapse, enabling charge collapse, is what made anything negentropic self-organizing. For example, Einstein knew that non-destructive charge collapse would teach him why objects fall to the ground, but he never figured that out. And the reason he didn't figure it out was because he didn't know where the charge goes at the center. Now we do. It's because when the charge reaches the center, which is specifically only and always everywhere Planck, that it's enabled into distribution into an array. And that's why Planck is the same for 1 billion light years in all directions. It's not the Big Bang. It's because the array only permits the longitudinal harmonics, which are gravity waves, to propagate if they fit the discipline of phase of that array. That's the reason Planck is the same for 1 billion light years in all directions, because the charge goes through the center of that vortex when it's released into the Planck threshold, and that is the drain hole at the bottom of the vortex that enables charge collapse. And charge collapse is the reason gravity exists, life exists, consciousness exists, all negentropy exists, and soul exists.
Could this be outfitted? Because what we're looking at with everything coming down, and I'm in contact with, people like Sabrina Wallace and Dan Willis have been friends. And recently, I don't know if you know about Ryan Valley. He was just on Project Camelot and the LA Bio Expo. He's going to be our new Canadian kind of AI guy in here too. And one of the things I was wondering, can we actually interface the Theraphi and those sort of things and add them in or include them somehow to something, let's like an in harmony bed or the amethyst crystal biomats, those type of things, and interface it? Because I was thinking it should work really well, because I've been doing a lot of the biofeedback, and I'm using primarily the Lakofsky coils and the vortex coils.
Yeah.
And using that water, putting them into enemas, colonics, yoni vaginal steams, or fermenta lingam steam, I guess. But also I've been doing the live blood, and I am one of Dr. Robert Young's, I'm the Canadian.
We were at a center in Ecuador recently. Yeah. Well, the physics here is that Lakofsky, for example, was very close to getting golden ratio phase conjugation. He almost got it. And Priory also almost got it. And that's the antecedent to the Theraphi. But yes, our harmonic cascade would be the most powerful possible. In fact, Theraphi is called plasmamedbed.com also, because embedding into that array. And that harmonic cascade is available for driving, and it should drive 1,000 technologies, because all technologies that reach negentropy, the definition of healing, have to have optimized charge collapse. And that harmonic series is available at Flame and Sound app from flameandmind.com, and we use it in all of our technology. And by the way, we've retuned it recently to optimize for the Schumann cascade. A bit of a story, but yeah.
No, I'd be really interested in that, because I've done a bunch up here. I'm in the Kootenays, what people know north of Q552 base, Nelson, British Columbia. In this area. So we're really getting hit out here too with everything around us. So what we're trying to do is, between a few of us, is set up myself, and I think you've been on our show too, is Janine Strong at Keeping It Real with Janine. But in there, between the two of us, we have enough to set up a really nice center again. We've kind of gathered our things, and I was thinking that would be a lot better, because I've looked at a couple other ones and done the pre and post live blood, and it just looks like hell. Yes, and I was really impressed with seeing what you have put together through your different.
Yes, we've got beautiful live blood cell results at theraphi.net and at plasmafire.com. And now I would encourage you to think about piezofire.com, because you can do all of that for about 5% of the cost at piezofire.com. And that piezo, by the way, is the way you drive an Atlantean fire crystal. And that piezo is the way you drive water purification, because it's literally capacitive implosion, which, by the way, defines orgone. So yes, the frequency cascade properly radiated, and that the Theraphi triggered water and imploder triggered water has been used for healing in many continents, especially skin diseases. So yeah, lots we can do. Fun.
It would be interesting. I don't know if you know, but one of the few Tesla generators outside of Niagara Falls is right here at my village. And there's been a Tesla generator going at the Sandon Silverton mine for 126 years. They still have light bulbs that are going from that. So I figure this is the safest place when it all goes down.
Thank you, Karen, for your question. Let's give others a chance. Francis put up his hand as well. Francis got something going.
A nice spin off this, and Grandmother, I'm glad that you stopped in today. Anyway, in her location, we've had a few interesting flares from the sun, and they've come in and extended the aurora borealis clear south into Florida and parts of Africa. What is the effect on the Schumann frequencies and life here on Earth as these interactions happen from our sun?
Well, it's that as the solar plasma flare gets more dense, it's obvious we'll have more aurora borealis. That's obvious. The physics is that increases the compression effect. And so the necessity of the Earth to absorb that compression non-destructively, it's basically the same reason they installed pyramids at Dodeca-Icosa. It's called a gravity diode for stabilizing atmosphere and planetary gravity, actually. So the effect of massive compression events require the Earth to either achieve implosion or fall apart. So that what that means is the Schumann harmonics do not increase in frequency. Wrong. Greg Braden didn't really get that right. No, the Schumann harmonics increase in harmonic inclusiveness and phase accuracy to phase conjugate Schumann to Planck, planckfire.com. So as the pressure increases, the Earth has to either become implosive or die, really, which is another name for the rapture.
All right. Excellent. I was trying to pick up the 3 words that you had when you were talking about the Planck fire spot on your screen, and it had gravity, and I think it was conscious something, and I didn't get it written down. Can you quickly go over that?
Yeah, so you take Planck length or time, multiply by integer exponents of golden ratio, fractality perfected, and you get every single negentropic harmonic in the universe, hydrogen radii, et cetera, et cetera. That perfects charge collapse, which is the cause and origin of gravity, life force, consciousness, and all negentropy.
Is it the same conjugate? Is it the same vortice, or is it just slightly different frequencies coming to that Planck constant?
They all obey Planck times golden ratio to the integer n power, all of them. Now, actually, when Hermes was designing the Schumann harmonics of this planet to drive the pyramids, the Hummers, to be global wireless power, he got the 7.83 hertz very close to the theoretical correct 7.29. So if you go to Bosnian pyramid, where 1 million people arrive and get negentry rejuvenation every year, the harmonics there are 7.83 cascading up to the 28 kilohertz on the roof. So the Schumann cascade is slightly modified from planckfire.com because the symmetry of the Earth wasn't quite accurate to pure implosion. Hermes was working on that, but you know, the other part of that is that Tesla did not understand the relationship of coherent longitudinal gravity waves, unfortunately. That's why he made some earthquakes, actually. But the thing is that he didn't, well, a short summary, Tesla had the concept of longitudinal nicely, but he didn't have the harmonic series right. He didn't, the choice of 60 hertz was a disaster because 50 is Planck fire, 60 is a disaster. You can't make carbon nano in a 60 hertz plant. It don't work. Tesla screwed up. He got the frequency and he got the nodal locations wrong. He had the light bulbs out in the field trying to light the light bulbs at a distance, power at a distance, but he didn't know that they had to be at the longitudinal nodes. I explained that all at pyramidwirelesspower.com.
We have a question. This is going into the more medical of this. Any advice to clear clogged arteries, congested heart failure, a frequency, a material, or something to read? Is there, in this dis-ease process that's going on worldwide, a way to get people back to ease with frequencies and maybe undo some of these processes that are afflicting them?
Well, you know, obviously it's a huge question. One part of that question that we have addressed very nicely in the Theraphi.net, sometimes called plasmamedbed.com, that if you introduce a negentropic field, that is the perfected vibration. You can do that piezoelectrically, piezofire.com. You can do it optically with the noble gases and Theraphi and quantify. You can do it with infrasound. It's the same cascade at different bandwidth. And absolutely that will, well, we've measured infrared reduced inflammation, dramatic, and increased circulation. Actually, circulation perfected is the definition of a phase conjugate longitudinal array, as well as metabolic increase. So yes, a phonon cascade is absolutely conducive to circulation for sure. And we're very good at that, as well as localized pain. We have met several people who had serious hernia and dealt with the localized pain in one session, piezofire.com.
Okay, because we talked earlier about the heart frequency being in line, as you said, it's kind of like almost like a lie detector sitting there. If we can get people to get into this state of this harmonic resonance of their heart, then the blood vessels and stuff will have to change or adapt to that. And as you showed in your videos, when you look at the clumping of red blood cells, which is really bad news, if they can separate and travel through the arteries and into the capillaries, then you end up not having those clogs and strokes and that kind of stuff in areas.
So that's what we measured in the live blood cell trials, both with Theraphi and plasmafire.com. Exactly. And that is the point, that circulation perfected is distribution perfected, which obviously is the fractal array perfected. So there's both a phonon component, electromagnetic component, optical component, but it is all about increased circulation. Basically, pain is charge that bleeds because fractality is broken. So restored compression electrically is the electrical opposite of pain, and restored compression is the electrical definition of circulation.
Okay, there was two that came in here. One of the comments that came up just now, and I really appreciate it, people with gut problems like the colon, these mimic the arteries, and so when they clean the arteries, they settle down colon, that your intestines, because they're tied directly. They're part of the whole picture.
Well, I think the cilia that vibrate to move the intestines are phonon liquid comparable to the only driver of the spine liquid pump, sacrocranial, which is the only physics of Kundalini. So we've proven that the sacrocranial low frequency harmonics, called the tidals, we've elaborately proven, first by measurement, capacitive coupling, and even microwave, that the Kundalini harmonics in the sacrocranial, they're called the tidals, the chief one being the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, which is the LF component of HRV. Those are all exactly Planckfire.com. So since the spine liquid pump is demonstrably the only measurement mechanism of Kundalini and bliss, and exactly Planck fire, that would then apply to the cilia pumping in the intestines as well. It's a rhythm.
Okay, I've got two questions that are coming that are going to kind of string together. And we're going back to basics now. And the first question is, can you explain this bliss? You know, what are we talking about when the person goes into the state of bliss that you explained? Then I'll get to the next question.
Yeah, the brainwave signature is clear. Flameinmind.com, golden ratio harmonic EEG from alpha to gamma. The sacrocranial component is clear, golden ratio harmonic, and the sacrocranial pump liquid physics of Kundalini. So bliss is the electrical compression, which then enables radiance. Very simple. The rose has to be squeezed perfectly before it can unpack. So implosive compression enables the radiance named bliss, and then you inhabit a larger and larger array, literally a longitudinal array. This means practically that you really shouldn't even try this if you're in a metal building full of shitty electrosmog. Hell no, you're going to be sucking in poison.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on the vortex water triple imploder and the quantify generator?
Yeah, we talked about quantify. Well, the imploder technology is at theimploder.com, which I took the perfection of Schauberger's vortex based on my equation and my equation for the radii of hydrogen, and I built it in the perfect nozzle vortex, theimploder.com, which is just now undergoing a massive expansion into larger and larger commercial technologies. Essentially, if you got the perfect charge collapse vortex, in this case, 5 golden spirals on the perfect 60-degree implosion cone defining dodecacellation, so that's the perfect implosion. Now, if that water is partially piezo hard water, then at the center of that vortex, you will have capacitive implosion, extreme spin density, extreme increase in solubility, and therefore the definition of hydration, the issue in most disease, and a radical solution for plant growth as well. That's what imploder.com. So we produce radical increase in spin density, therefore solubility, and therefore hydration in all of the imploder products. And they all work better actually in harder water because it's more piezo. But you'll see now we have 1-inch and 2-inch solid stainless. These things are monsters.
Wow. I'm going to make a comment and then I'm going to turn it back to Crystal. One of the things that we've noticed when we deal with these spiral compressions is the plasma effect at that Planck point. And it, in some cases, it actually emits a light frequency from that, and in different materials. It can be in gasoline, it can be in diesel, but it's at that vortice, that point, that all of a sudden we get something different. It's a plasmatic, it's a plasma-like spot rather than an electrical. Go ahead.
A water vortex can make a spark. John Dee called that scintillation and used it for ancestor phone calls because it's another node into the longitudinal array. It's the physics of the pinhole mirror effect in the Newport Tower. It's all about the center of the vortex where you maximize the compression, and that enables the DNA radio because that's a touch point into the longitudinal array.
Wow. Crystal, back to you.
Right. Ben, would you be able to explain clearly to the audience about the life force energy and how you said that our children in the future will be soulless if they do not, what's your recommendation to retain their soul?
In practice, what causes a seed to germinate is if it can suck. So commonly, Theraphi, $30,000 systems are purchased regularly just to trigger seed germination, actually. And Stonehenge and the great stone circles, often their primary function was triggering seed germination. So you learn the physics of what made the seed germinate, and you understand why you need implosive centripetal charge to create any form of life, especially consciousness. So, and in terms of soullessness, on a macro cellular level, then when the body has access to implosive compression, literally bliss, then the body begins to radiate more and more. The aura gets big. All decisions should be based on whether this is going to feed the aura, what broccoli you eat and who you hug and where you live. It's all about fa'atun, who feeds your aura. And so once children begin to understand that the only way through this life, it's not even about immortality or soul. It's the fact that the longer the wave, the more the soul, the more there is presence of mind. And to ride the long wave, Uncle Joe, as Surfers of the Savuya said, you need access to the longitudinal array, which is ancestor memory defined, actually. And so the Aboriginals knew that if you weren't talking to your ancestors, you didn't have a prayer, that you were useless. And that was their only name for God or the divine, that charge distribution. So the children need to learn that all of their decisions need to be based practically on access to kinds of electrical compression that enable human bliss and the growth of the aura, which is very measurable, and the only definition of soul, that coherent radiance. And otherwise, we're condemned to a Borg generation of soulless kids, actually.
Right. So you were explaining in much detail and clarity in a recent interview you did. I forgot the interviewer's name. But anyway, you were talking about how what causes the phenomenon of gravity. When you were explaining the longitudinal array and how the intersection, the ley lines comes about and all, I think it will be very interesting for our people here at FESIG to know that explanation.
Well, to put it very simply, even though Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and NASA cannot tell you why an object falls to the ground, you will need to know if you'd like to have a soul. And the reason objects fall to the ground is because, and physics is partially right that fractality causes gravity. The form of fractality that causes gravity is golden ratio phase conjugation, spitting out coherent longitudinal at the center, and that flow down the drain hole into the longitudinal array is what gravity is made of. So if you look at the top-down view of 10 golden mean spirals of hydrogen, the 10 golden spirals, remember, golden mean spirals are the most dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. This is a smoking gun. Fractality is what stabilizes the gravity that holds galaxies together, for God's sakes. So what happens, the reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry in all orbital mechanics is obvious, because the waves have to add and multiply recursively, constructively, not just their wavelength, but their phase velocity. And only golden ratio perfected fractality enables the recursive adding and multiplying of phase velocities. And that produces acceleration from compression only in golden ratio. And that acceleration from compression towards center of charge is named the gravity. So if you look at the 10 golden mean spirals that I proved is the structure of hydrogen, now you know why hydrogen makes gravity, and you know why anything makes gravity, because it spits out through the center, coherent longitudinal, and that way out for charge at the center of the bathtub drain is what enables that bathtub drain to be centripetal and enables the longitudinal out the other end to be directional, named gravity.
So with that knowledge then, how would you then explain simply how you can come about with the anti-gravity phenomenon?
Well, I use several examples. The EM drive is a trapezoidal microwave electromagnetic drive, and they bounce the microwave inside. And what they don't know is they need to optimize that microwave bounce inside the cavity to be phase conjugate to Planck, and they'll make more gravity. There's one example. Another example is the famous Koski-Frost crystal, which made 800 times its own weight in gravity, otherwise known as a fire crystal. And we will soon be offering firecrystal.com. But you can take piezo fire and phase conjugate pump wave, piezo crystal. It's called warp. But actually it's, as opposed to warp, you had impulse power, and impulse power is when you take, for example, that mercury vortex doped with a iron powder, making it red, and then they used a low-level radioactive, inducing the iron powder in the mercury that the Germans used, made it the famous red mercury, but then, which made it flux conductive magnetically. The mercury had high inertia, but the iron powder soluble in the mercury made it flux conductive. And then the low-level radioactive component, just as in the Paul Brown nuclear battery, made it quasi-superconductive. And so now that vortex, not unlike Schauberger's repulsine, the angle of that vortex is optimized that the transverse electromagnetic inertia is squeezed down the vortex at the correct angle to optimally spit out coherent longitudinal tuned to Planck at the center point. And those are very tunable and should be tuned with my equation by spectrum analysis, and you will make more gravity.
Then, are you suggesting that Schauberger's repulsine has been using mercury? Because
No. Schauberger wouldn't touch that poisonous stuff. He was right. But if piezoelectric water, the biodynamic technique to make the water piezo in the vortex is quite useful, and you can get we made some gravity that way. But the piezo vortex, now you get more density in a mercury, but even the mercury vortex is considered obsolete among many of the ETs, although the German Dark Fleet is still using that on Aldebaran, but that's another story.
Yeah, I don't know if there is any correlation with the tombs of the Emperor of China.
Absolutely, yes.
Mercury.
The mercury was used as a capacitive lens function. So the ETs were clear, and many different galactic civilizations were involved in the pyramid construction for gravity diode stabilization. And the mercury would increase the density of the phase conjugate pump wave in the super permissive, much more dense material, a lensing effect, meaning that pyramid would dump out more coherent longitudinal and thus deliver more power to the global wireless power grid from the Schumann phase conjugate pump wave, the Hummer, called pyramidwirelesspower.com. We know why the mercury was there. Absolutely.
So talking about pyramids, you did mention some effects that if somebody has been using mercury as the superconductor in a pyramidal function, it works. But that is, you did say that it's poisonous. So what material would be a good replacement that would be less harmful?
That's why warp power was more efficient than impulse power, same reason. So the Koski-Frost crystal is a highly piezo, tuned to the phase conjugate pump wave, made 800 times its own weight in gravity. That was what was called the dilithium crystals, Scotty, in Star Trek. So the warp function was literally phase conjugate pump wave, directional into longitudinal EMF. And if the longitudinal emission is coherent enough, you can take your own gravity field with you, means you can make a turn at 600 miles an hour and not get squashed.
So for a soul leaving the body in a death experience, could you explain how an electrical engineer would explain the scientific
yeah, studying lucid dreaming is the right thing to do, because you compress and you inhabit that array. So if your bed is on a magnetic cross point, you have a much better chance at it. If it's in a full moon or if it's in an eclipse, it's crap, because the moon is opposite to dielectric. You can't even make a seed grow if the moon gets in the way of the sun, man. The longitudinal just don't make it. So you need to know when and where to do it, for one thing. And then that's the enabled compression. The altar at Machu Picchu would be a great place to die. The typical metal electrosmog hell hospital I would describe as hell.
Press is a question.
Yeah, we've got a couple that are kind of interesting and along the line. We have two black materials that you discussed earlier, one being shungite and the other one being black obsidian. Why the color, and what is the properties that are used in this model that you're explaining?
I thought you were going to mention the black goo. That's going to be even more colorful. Well,
yeah.
The obsidian mirror is very simple. It approximates a crude phase conjugator, and that enables longitudinal prehension, which is how you see ancestors, which is the same as the physics of clairvoyance. So,
is it using the fractal lines in the obsidian or actual flat mirror in the creation of it?
The phase conjugate mirror is not nano in depth typically. So if there's any thickness at all, you're going to need a super dielectric, exactly the way barium strontium titanate works in a phase conjugate optical laser mirror. It's a media within which the pine cone implosion is capacitively permissive to efficient distribution of charge. And if there's not a medium for that perfect distribution of charge where you can embed into the array, that's why you must have a super dielectric. You know, typical physicists admire phase conjugate mirror because they get time reversal and negentropy, but they don't have a clue what's happening in the phase conjugator. Well, I will tell you, the pine cones are kissing noses. We know exactly what's happening.
And the shungite? Can you elaborate on the properties?
It's another example of a natural super dielectric. It's basically a capacitive lens for implosive distribution. We use shungite spheres to broadcast phase conjugate frequencies to fill the room at piezofire.com. You'll see that example. It's fairly parallel to the insect skeletons Grebennikov used to make gravity devices.
Anti-gravity, yeah. Yeah.
You touched on black goo. Did you want to jump into it real quick, or do you want to? I'll turn it back to Crystal.
Well, just the latest Elena Denon episode of the way the Draco and the Greys used that, it's horrible, really horrible. But you see, the fact that it's a phase conjugator, you can use, fullerenes for good or evil, really. And this was an example of a form of hive mind. It was a distributed awareness, and it was used for enslavement of billions of people. And they used Saturn as an antenna to enslave the whole planet to black goo. Oh yeah, check out Aya Enki's last broadcast. Elena Denon, she's right.
All right, Crystal.
Okay, we have James Reed here. Jim of Monaco is one of our speakers, and he's an expert in anti-aging, supplementation. Hi, Jim. Do you want to say hi to Dan? I'm sure Jim would like to know your explanation as an electrical engineer on how people can stay younger. on all this knowledge that you're imparting, how do you put it into practice? There you go.
Well, when negentropy was first measured in phase conjugate physics, optics, they proved that you could not time reverse toward disorder, only toward order. You cannot time reverse clean steel back to rusted, but you can time reverse rusted steel back to clean steel. You can only proceed toward order, defining negentropy as actually self-organization. So in practice, that means the negentropic field of Theraphi.net is exactly the same frequencies as the Bosnian pyramid, where 1 million people come every year to get younger. Actually, what the Anunnaki called it, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, and the Bible mistranslated that to be the altar in the church. No, it was a phase conjugator for age reversal, actually. And that age reversal happens because if you implode, where the waves pass through center, they're forced into massive phase discipline named negentropy. The altar, the Shem unto the Lord, is literally a negentropic electric field, implosive capacitance.
But the thing is, the Bosnian pyramid, Dr. Sam Osmanagis is one of our speakers as well. It's not exactly, they hadn't found a tunnel that goes directly underneath the pyramid with the
Well, I just made a documentary with Sam, our rep, Patrick Botti, who made most of our measurements, measured there the 7.83 cascade. And, you know, the theory predicts 50 hertz, but in the pyramids and all Earth structure, we find 53 hertz. And that's 50 to 53 is exactly the ratio of 7.29 to 7.83, the actual Schumann. And then we went up on the roof and found the 28 kilohertz. We fit the cascade perfectly. So we know exactly why Sam's Bosnian pyramid massively induces age reversal into 1 million people every year. It's
even if it's not directly under the base of the pyramid, right? But you see that
it could probably be tuned better, I'm sure that, but originally it is a structure. The ancients called the pyramids the Hummer. Now we know exactly why. That Hummer is a phase conjugate pump wave infrasound, the Hummer, called the Schumann cascade.
Folks, I just want to say that I've always been interested in organizing a group trip to the Bosnian pyramids. So if you're interested, please contact me, write to me, crystal@truevisionpeace.com. Coming back to you, Dan. Right. I understand that the apex of the pyramid, as Sam had been talking about, actually emits a frequency of 28 to 30.
It's 28 kilohertz, 28 we measured.
28 to 30, 28. Okay. So apparently when Nikola Tesla has built his Wardenclyffe Tower, he has also tuned it to 28 to 30 kilohertz. Was he trying to do a communication with all the pyramids in the world to sort of like calibrate and communicate?
Absolutely. Global wireless power was absolutely Tesla's dream. But unfortunately, because he didn't know PlanckFire.com, he got the frequencies wrong. He was close. 28 kilohertz is very close. It's actually 27.8, I believe. And because it's modified to the actual Schumann and not pure phase
Schumann frequency, yeah. So that is an energy amplifier, a generator, isn't it? The pyramids were built for that, right? And if Tesla has already sort of like solved the equation, he was going to bring free energy to the world, right? That way.
Well, that's what people love to dream about. They say we were cheated of free energy because they didn't let Tesla go, but Tesla didn't understand. Free energy is only a name for perfected charge distribution, which is only a name for perfected charge collapse, and that is PlanckFire.com. And so he didn't have the frequencies and the nodes correct. Tesla was not succeeding.
I thought he was going to, and they stopped him.
Well, he was building beam weapons. He thought the best way to make money at the time was beam weapons, which is longitudinal. We know how Luke Skywalker's lightsaber worked. It's a longitudinal beam, basically. But so he was trying to convert that into military. But in terms of global wireless power, if you didn't understand the Schumann cascade is the primary phase conjugate pump wave of the planet, and Tesla didn't, and that's why, you know, he made some earthquakes, I think.
Go ahead, Fresh, you got something to talk about.
Yeah, I've got one real quick question. We were talking about pyramids and that type of stuff, and I did see on your illustration reference to this other structure. Was the Tower of Babel, way back the depiction, was that a in phase or out of phase conjugate structure?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. Baal was Enlil's name for Enki, as in Babylon and Baal. And Enki understood the relationship between the phonon harmonics of language, the physics of the origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit, for example, to imploding DNA. So you could build structures within which DNA radio could work. Ba'abel. El means access to the phase shift, as in Elohim, where you move from transverse to longitudinal, which is how you get immortal. It's called the Elohim. So Ba'abel has a very specific meaning.
Thank you. Back to you, Crystal.
I've seen a lot of beautiful illustrations in your website, and you were showing the relation between the Schwaberger's vortexing spirals that is related to what you're talking about, that's the spin of the anode and the soul. So would you be able to show some diagrams and give us some clarity there when you're talking about people are getting soulless? What have they lost in terms of diagrams to illustrate?
Those graphics are all at 7arrows.net, where I analyze the structure of the Anu.
The Anu, yeah.
Yeah, the original
The
clairvoyance,
infinitesimal particle operation, isn't that what it's saying?
they call it the fundamental. Remember, the clairvoyants investigated the electrical structure at the heart of the sun. They drew Anu, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. Then they investigated the electrical structure of the heart of the human. And they drew Anu, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. We know the 7 layers of heart muscle, human, is exactly at the phase angles of the 7 spins of the tetra. That's well known. And then they drew the electrical structure at the heart of hydrogen, and they drew the same picture. Now, what is 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside? Well, hello, 7 spins is tetracubic. It's right here. And the 5 spins is dodecaecosa. It's right here. They were drawing the perfect implosive slip knot, but they didn't know how to draw it. So they just did something poetic with their little drawing of the Anu, but they were actually drawing the structure, which I then proved by equation, is how hydrogen is built. Pure implosion, exactly in the same way that Kepler drew the relationship of the gravity mechanics of the orbital of the planets of the solar system as simply a nest of platonics. That same nest of platonics that governs planetary orbitals is exactly the only way the atomic table is put together. Electron shells is only exactly this nest, SPDF. The hadrons of the nucleus, only exactly this geometry. It's all the Anu. It's perfect implosion. 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside.
So there's a spin, right, of the Anu, and like the vortex spin, the imploder, as you would say. I'm talking about the toroidal energy that goes around the Anu. So why does it, is there a particular direction that it spins? Is it always anti-clockwise?
Well, in the 5-spin dodecaecosa pent symmetry, you have essentially 12 vortex, 1 into each face. In the 7-spin tetracubic tetracube octa, it's a 7-spin symmetry, axes, origins of Hebrew and human heart muscle. In there, you have 6 perpendicular vortex. For example, that's how the pi suborbital is built. And in terms of direction of spin, it's exactly like asking a biologist why every living protein enantiomorphic helix goes one way only. Biologists don't know. They don't. But they all go one way. Hello. If the direction of the first lightning in the primal soup had been centrifugal and not centripetal, we would not have DNA.
So that's only one way that applies to all of nature.
Well, in one particular galactic sector, enantiomorphic spin orientation produces one centripetal and one centrifugal. It's exactly why the south side of a magnet will make your toothache hurt more, but heal faster. The north side of that same magnet, centrifugal, will reduce the pain and the healing rate. It's not a centripetal.
Right, Fres, you want to add to that, Fres, on the toroidal spin, perhaps?
Basically, it's, as I explain in my classes, it's your point of reference. And whether you're looking down at the top of the planet or looking up at the bottom of the planet from the North Pole or from the South Pole, one will give you the clockwise spin, one will give you an anti-clockwise spin.
Yep.
But the planet is only rotating in one direction.
Yes.
So
we have some lovely graphics on sorting out, because what's confusing is the Chinese named plus and minus magnetic poles the opposite of the Western countries. So if you want to know which side of your magnet to reduce pain, it gets very confusing. We sorted that out at goldenmean.info/magnetics. But basically, it's true that one direction is more centripetal in general. And that.
Yeah. Dan, go on in detail on that one. How does a person take away pain? And how did pain come about? You explained that very clearly in one of your interviews, and I thought that's fascinating. Go ahead.
Pain is a name for a crystal whose fractality has been broken, and therefore the charge is bleeding. That's what pain is. You restore compression, which is fractality, and pain goes away. It's very dramatic, very quick, like the hernia pain that goes away if you implode the capacitance, piezofire.com. So it's a very simple thing. Restored compression is the opposite of pain, both electrically and mechanically. And Elizabeth Rauscher, in her FDA pain reduction trials, came to the same golden ratio phase conjugate harmonics of magnetics, that produce pain reduction. That's all in the physics of Theraphi, theraphi.net. So pain is simply compression that's broken. So restored electrical compression, massively centripetal field, and the more broad spectral the phase conjugate centripetal field, the more effective the pain reduction.
So can one do that in meditation and using the power of the mind, thoughts and consciousness to repair that?
But well, meditation is all about compression. That's what it's all about.
So
it's
decompression
about,
is possible.
Yeah, and for successful compression, you're going to need golden ratio brainwave harmonics, which are the Schumann harmonics. You're going to need golden ratio spine liquid pump harmonics, which is the sacrocranial, which are all phase conjugate. Restored compression and meditation are the same thing.
Absolutely. Here.
That's why it works better where the magnetic lines cross.
Yeah. Is the next speaker here already, Robert Maxine? Because I think we're going to wrap up very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert, are you here? Okay. Right. So we'll continue.
Got a question?
Sure, Scott. There you go. I thought you'd speak up. Go on then, bro.
Yeah, Robert is just coming in. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, can you comment a little bit about using magnets to structure water? Just simple homemade something, because you really were going in on that deep. I yield.
Yeah, the imploder.com, the super imploder and ultra imploder both use centripetal magnetics primarily, and they are the compression south pole facing, but remember south and north are misnamed in the Chinese manufacturer. It's very confusing. But the compression poles, opposing magnetic poles, face each other, aiding compression radically. Now, when you emerge from a perfected vortex directly into implosive magnetics, the shredding of that vorticity into compression produces even more dramatic reduction of molecular cluster size and spin density. That's the principle behind super imploder and ultra imploder. But every single government study that's ever been done on magnetics for water treatment has come out positive. They all know that implosive magnetics is beautiful for agriculture with or without the vortex. And by the way, you can do the same thing on your diesel fuel line in your truck, and it does dramatically good stuff because you're adding centripetal force.
Right.
So you're saying I don't need the vortex and I can do it with the magnets?
There's 1,000 devices commercially out there that do it with magnets alone, and a lot of them do really useful stuff. Now, if you add the vortex, you get a whole lot more. That's all.
Okay, because I'm using the Terra wand, but I want to make something myself. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Blessings.
Thank you, Scott. Anybody else? What about you, John? Billy, you got any question for us? An electrical engineer will answer you the questions in your area of interest. From them. Anybody else got any question for then? Because I'm going to wrap up very soon.
If all problems in the universe are electrical, then electrical engineers. It's like everything looks like a hammer, so I know everything looks like a nail, so my only tool is a hammer. Electrical.
Electrical. Yeah.
Dan, could you address a little bit what I've been seeing here, and I've been doing a lot with Tony Pantalleresco and some of the Canadian nano anti-tech stuff guys up here, is that we're seeing different things like nanozeolite. I'm talking very high parts per million that are coming out. Silvers that are 20,000 parts per million, not 10. And we're seeing a lot of stuff almost on live blood cell. And I think what's happening, Tony has mentioned, is it's acting like an attractant, similar to when they did the silver shungite. Nancy and Derek and all those guys from Shungite Reality, it actually tumbled into the actual shungite. So could that be the possibility why we're seeing that? Like, I've had people go on these and all of a sudden, bang, they're having attacks and think they're being taken by grays and really negative effects with this kind of high nano level. Is that not really feeding the AI in a sense? And just as an aside too, I've tried a couple of these patches, not only myself and my clients. We go into heart attack stuff. I've had a girl almost stroke out. We have to do house calls, and if there's something that's not working, obviously benevolently for everyone, whether it's the pH, the blood type, the polarization, whatever.
Can you that sounds complicated, Karen. You can have a conversation with Dan. You do know each other, right? Because our next speaker is here already. Unless then you can answer that question very quickly.
Well, just, fullerene is a phase conjugator for carbon, and it can be used for good or evil. A black goo is a phase conjugator. It's used for extreme evil, but it's just a powerful tool, and it can be either. One thing I would say is that after we learned that you need the right frequency signature in the environment to make carbon nano grow, and then you realize that those frequency signatures can be used as DNA radio for bliss or as control radio for the bad guys. The grays use black goo. So it simply to understand how phase conjugators create massive communication.
Dan, so in other words, you're saying that what you call it, phase conjugation can only occur if the things that wants it to occur is in perfect alignment with the Creator's loving light. Are you saying that? Anything
Well, that's a wonderful way to
phase conjugation. Yeah.
A wonderful way to distill the metaphor. At death, for example, which is the perfect broad spectral phase conjugation, you only get through if you're a shareable wave, literally pure intention. And the heart being a laser measures pure intention, means theshareablewave.com. And it means able to be distributed. That's how you enter into the collective unconscious, which means if you can do compression well, you can be shared perfectly.
Thank you. That's a good food for thought.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think one last question. Tim is an electrical engineer in the UK. Tim, you have one question for Dan before I close the session? Tim, unless you can't speak, you don't have a mic. Can you unmute yourself? Tim is our new R&D member.
He said in the chat earlier he has no mic or.
Oh, he has no mic, and James Reed also has no mic. Okay, it's all right then. So, Press, would you want to have any last say before we close the session?
I think it's a good place to wrap it up. The last couple comments that Dan gave is a perfect closure for today's meeting. Thank you so much, Dan.
Wonderful. I would like to thank Dan Winter for gracing our platform with his brilliant theories and practical stuff that he is able to apply his knowledge to. That's wonderful. And I want to thank
Clan Mother, we could talk later. It's okay.
Yeah, you could talk later privately, Clan Mother. I'm sorry, I have to shorten your questions because there's so many of us, and our second speaker is already here.
Thank you for helping me be a shareable wave. Thank you.
And I would like to thank also Dan's delightful, beautiful, divine other half, Valerie Sandelin. Would you show yourself? She's working in the background, supporting Dan, doing all this great work behind.
Thank you. Thank you, Valerie.
Valerie, can we see you? Say hi.
She's shy. She's a little shy.
Oh, there you go. Our divine
sorry, I'm not
Sun Yogi sister.
She's shy.
See your face. Anyway, thank you so much both. Namaste.
No, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's stay in touch.
No other business. This first session of our 125th FESIG meeting is now adjourned to the second session, so we can stop recording now.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.